Well, welcome, Jeremy. Thanks for joining us today to talk about millennial travelers. I know you're in and out, so we're pre-recording this session. Tell me just a little bit about where you came from and where you're heading to.
Yes, thank you. So got back in last week, back into New York from the Middle East. So I was in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. We spent a week covering the World Government Summit, which is the way they position it is like a Davos, but for governments. So talking about the future of travel, the future sustainability of artificial intelligence, of all these things that sit in the interests of consumers and that governments haven't really had a platform to talk about up until now. So I spent the week doing that, here for a few days, and then off to Malawi on Friday.
Right. Well, that sounds interesting, a whole other story and interview in and of itself. But maybe first off, for all of our participants in the webinar tonight, you can just explain to us a little bit about what is Beautiful Destinations and what are you guys doing?
Yes, of course. So we have three parts to our business. The first part, which most people know us for, is our audience, our community. And this for us is our media brand. So there are 20 million people around the world that come to Beautiful Destinations every day on Instagram, on Facebook, Snapchat, YouTube, and 2 million of those are on Weibo in China. And they come to us really for inspiration about travel and tourism. And that platform serves as kind of the distribution arm for our creative agency, which sits down with governments, with tourism boards, with airlines, hotels, and helps them to create advertising campaigns for a mobile connected traveler. And then we push it out on Beautiful Destinations. The third piece is then actually a big push for our business into the entertainment space and looking at ways of creating travel programming for streaming services like the Apple Musics and the Netflix, the Facebook Watches, these places where people are now spending a lot of their time consuming content. There is a huge opportunity to be telling travel stories there, and that's what we're trying to do.
Great. Well, I want to come back to that a little bit later, but first wanted to sort of start off with, you really began as a influencer in the social space, primarily on Instagram. And, as we saw in my presentation earlier, that social media postings now for millennial travelers are slightly more influential in determining where they decide to vacation than professional printed magazine articles and newspaper articles. So tell me a little bit, why do you think that is? Why has social become so influential in the consideration of where people travel today?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to two very important insights. The first is, where do consumers spend their time? And where has consumer attention shifted to? And overwhelmingly, it has moved to the mobile device. I think for the last decade, we've been hearing in the media about how mobiles are going to be the dominant platform for people communicating with each other. And that is absolutely now the case. So if we think that the majority of people are consuming their news, their perspective on the world, connecting with their friends and family, understanding what's happening around them through their mobile phone, then it makes sense that that should be a device that people think about when it comes to actually marketing about travel and tourism. The second is, I think it's estimated here in the States at least, that 1 in every 5 minutes that's spent on a mobile phone is spent on either Instagram or Facebook. And I think that trend is replicated in China with platforms like Weibo and WeChat, where so much time that is spent on mobile is spent using social platforms to communicate. It makes a lot of sense that becomes a very influential place to go and discover travel content. I think those are the two trends that are really driving everything. Further to that, we're seeing from the actual platforms themselves that video is exploding as a communication medium. I think Cisco estimates that by 2020, as much as 80% of online traffic will be video. And so you have this combining forces of more people spending more time on mobile, and that time on mobile being on social media, and then concurrently the consumption of the content that they're engaging in being video. That all comes together to create a very visually rich marketing environment for travel and tourism boards to consider, which is why I think it's becoming such a dominant force in deciding where people go.
Right. And so at Beautiful Destinations, one of the things I've read about your organization is you have a process for testing content to anticipate what content will get a better reaction. I've looked at all of your work and I see lots of beautiful photos. What makes one photo more beautiful than the other in terms of stimulating response or actions? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So again, it comes back to the insight that digital and social platforms give you data whenever you share content, and they play a role alongside traditional media always. We're very much a big believer that even though we advocate for social first, it's definitely not social only when it comes to your marketing. But that data enables you to understand which pieces of content resonate with which audiences. And so for us, we've built a series of proprietary algorithms that are predictive in nature, which means they can ingest a piece of content. They can look at the color, the brightness, the hue, the percentage of person versus landscape, all the different elements which make up the digital fingerprint of that image, and then predict how well that piece of content will do when it's shared with a target group. And so when we work with a partner, we'll say, let us shoot your campaign. We'll give you all of these photo assets and all of these video assets. Then let our systems tell you, based on the people that you want to target and the platforms that you want to use, which pieces of content we think will perform the best, and then run those as your ads. And so the system works by using social media to start and generate data, then come back internally, analyze the data, analyze the performance, and then use the content which we've seen perform to then inform what might go into a magazine spend or a billboard spend or even a television commercial, but having that backbone of data to inform what you actually do.
So are there hard and fast rules in terms of what content works or doesn't work in terms of colors or style or lighting?
Sure.
Or is it different from one audience to another?
You know, we get asked that a lot, and actually it is different for every single audience and for every single brand. So if you were to look at Beautiful Destinations, our brand is very much a celebration of color. It's very much a vibrant, colourful style, and that's the thing that our audience really resonates when we create our own content. But it's very, very different from client to client, and everyone from a major multinational hotel group will have a very different look and feel to the way they tell their stories than a Caribbean tourism board. And so for us, it's trying to understand from each one of our clients, what do you think your brand is? And then let's shoot a campaign against those brand guidelines, and then let's see how it performs. So unfortunately, there's no one answer.
So does it really start with having a sense of who that target audience is first, so that you're shooting content that's not just beautiful, but it's shot in a way that will resonate with that audience you're seeking to influence?
Exactly. And actually the extension of that now is that really if you want to engage different target markets, you need different types of content for different types of platforms, for different types of audiences. So if we're thinking about how do we attract the Chinese consumer to come to New York City, that whole story and the look and the feel of that content and the platforms that it's shown on is very different to how we might target the Australian consumer to come to New York. And that, again, could vary depending on the age of the consumer or their digital fluency. So there are lots of these different variables to consider when it actually comes to making content. And I think the days of creating a 2-minute Super Bowl commercial only or a large TV campaign and just putting it out there and mass marketing a story, I think those days are gone, and digital and social allow you to be much more effective and intelligent with the way you market.
Right. So obviously, some destinations are more beautiful than others. I mean, when we look at your website and your Instagram feed, they all look phenomenal. But
Thank you.
What are some of the more challenging destinations you'd work with, and how would you learn from that?
Sure. So I mean, we work with everyone from government at the top level to market a country, down to individual states and down to individual cities. And I think without wanting to call out an individual place and say that it was very difficult, I think there are lots of challenges across all of those different types of landscapes. And what we try to find is a unique perspective that tells a slightly different story to something that's been told before. So if you were to go to Paris, we've all seen advertising of Paris that heroes the Eiffel Tower and shows the Eiffel Tower. So the challenge would be, how do you go to Paris and tell a story that might involve a cultural landmark like that and make it look completely unique, whether that's a perspective you've never seen before, whether that's a use of camera technology to get a story that hasn't been out in the open yet. That's what we'd really try to focus on. And that's actually what captures people's attention. Now, if you think about where that content then lives, it's very, very different telling a story when you have 3 seconds on mobile to engage a person, which is what they estimate you get when you first show your video, then when they sit down and they have a lot of time to read a book or read a magazine. So you have to think about how you engage a person depending on which platform they're on and how much time you have to do that. So with Facebook, for example, we know that many of those videos, they default with no sound. And many of our clients were coming to us and saying, well, we're spending tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on music and sound design for a platform which we're able to educate them on actually doesn't matter in the first instance. So perhaps that budget could be better used on creating slightly different types of video to see what works before you go and spend a lot of money on licensing tracks, just as an example. So it's that kind of level of detail that you need to think about when it comes to now creating content and how you tell a story of a place.
Right. Well, it sounds incredibly complex when you go back from thinking about the target audience and defining the brand message, different types of content for different audiences, different types of content for different channels. I mean, what would be the best practices if you tried to try and sum that up for a destination marketing organization or a hotel company?
Yeah, of
as they
course.
think about social, what are the rules that you would kind of tell them to follow?
So first and foremost, absolutely invest in video. And if you aren't, which I think the majority of people aren't doing at the moment, invest a little bit more than you are currently today in video. The second is to understand the different types of video assets that really perform. And for us, the fundamentals are how you use vertical video, which is what you'd see on a platform like Instagram, where it's shot vertically and it looks very different to a horizontal video you might see on YouTube. And then for an actual practical application, never shoot just one video. Gone are the days of tourism boards doing their 3 or 5 minute commercial and that was it, and they would do it once a year and it would be out there, or they'd do it once a season. Now you need multiple variations of that video, and it could be the same video but cut into a 15-second edit, a 30-second edit. Now on most of the social platforms you're seeing 6-second, even 3-second ad units. So those would be the 3 pieces of advice I'd give.
Right. Well, maybe finally coming back around to some of your comments at the beginning of, tell us a little bit about your thoughts on the future of destination marketing. Mm-hmm. Is social media marketing and management it, or are there other media? I mean, you mentioned a few in the beginning in your introduction. So tell us a little bit about where is this going?
So I think it's all integrated, and what you're going to see is a movement rather than a distinct split between people who only do social media and digital media and people who do traditional. I think they're going to blend, and more the most successful tourism marketing organizations are recognizing that if they start on social channels, they can see performance of content, which I mentioned. Once they see that performance of content on social, those assets should be the assets that they use in their email marketing. They should be the assets that they put on their website. They should be the assets that they run in flights, on television, in billboards, in magazines, and so on and so on. And so I think the trend is moving towards just flipping the way that they have created content in the past, where traditionally it was shoot the big traditional hero commercial, then get all the content and as an afterthought put it on social media. Now I believe we're in a world where the most effective organizations are actually reversing that, starting on social media and then expanding out from there.
So the development of social content is actually a way of testing and developing content for other media channels as well.
That's exactly what we push. And I think when you realize that and you embrace that, you can then educate all other areas of your marketing mix with data and with insight. And I think as we start to understand how powerful social and digital channels are, you realize that you can make mistakes and you can learn and you can be much more nimble in the way that you market, because not being a travel guy for that long, I came into the industry and learned very quickly that the traditional way of marketing travel was looking at the seasons, doing your hero campaigns each season, working for 3 months, putting out a campaign, stopping to start on the next season and doing that over and over. But actually now with digital and social media, if you're not constantly putting out content every single day, maybe even multiple times a day, you aren't relevant. But if you make mistakes, once it's gone, it's disappeared and it's forgotten about. So you can be much more flexible and not have to put all of this effort in doing your one big annual campaign that if it misses the mark, you get abused or challenged by the industry. You can do multiple little campaigns that can then inform a bigger campaign, and that's a much more successful way to do it.
Great. Well, it sounds like a lot of interesting developments, and appreciate you coming in and spending some time with us today. We'll share Beautiful Destinations website up here on the screen for everyone that should be able to find it quite easily, Googling it on their own, but we'll provide that information to everyone in the webinar, and appreciate you coming in today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Thanks, now.